Welcome back to Composition and its Allies. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers interested in composition. In today's episode of Orchestration for Beginners, we're going to talk about how to orchestrate a tutti passage. Please note I have divided this episode into two parts. We're currently in part 1. If you enjoy this episode and you want to watch part 2, I will leave information in the video description for the scheduled release date. A quick review of the concepts we touched upon in the first episode of the season. Remember that when you first start orchestrating, you want the orchestration to sound good in each section. So the strings should sound good, the woodwinds should sound good, and then the brass and percussion as a whole. This is how they teach orchestration in France. I think it is a great way to get started and to ensure that your orchestration is just well balanced at all possible times. But it will not last you forever. At a certain point, you have to take off the training wheels completely. And finally, if you want to get better at orchestration, I recommend two things. One, the immediate solution is to start listening to live music. No, not recorded music, not at home, but physically being there, hearing live music. It will sharpen your ear. You'll notice right away that when you go to orchestrate, you can hear much more acutely what you want to hear. And the other thing is to attack it at the source. So the vast majority of problems or issues or concerns that come up when we orchestrate can be traced back to harmony. So if there is a deficiency in your harmonic understanding, and I have to say, for a lot of composers, especially coming from American system, they do not have a strong level of harmony, and those holes will come to haunt you when you orchestrate. First, we're going to orchestrate the strings. If you remember from the first episode of the season, I talked about how the strings are kind of the most important section in the orchestra. They're the heart of the orchestra. Definitely for the great masterworks, you'll see that they put all the important information in the string section. So we're going to orchestrate the strings first. So when you're orchestrating, one of the first concerns you're going to have, especially for a chord, is what's the top note going to be? Like if you have a simple chord, root, third, fifth, is the fifth in the top voice, is the third, or is the root? They are all very, very different from each other, and it's something that you have to start addressing, start consciously hearing. If you want to investigate this a little bit more, you can look at the Beethoven symphonies, the first chord or the last chord of any of the movements, and notice what is the effect, what does it sound like when the third is in the violins for the last note, or what if the fifth is in the violins, what if it's in the flutes. The next thing I want to talk about is called the ambitus. So I think I've touched upon this in a previous episode of Orchestration for Beginners. I definitely talked about this in Orchestration for Composers, but a reminder that the ambitus is the distance from the lowest note to the highest note. Okay, so in this particular example, we're looking at the double bass to the violin. And I have to say, in America, I never had a teacher talk about this in orchestration. And it's what we in French would say, quel dommage, because this is one of the technical things that is always there in the background. You can never not think about it, because if you have a large ambitus, then you're going to have to bring in a lot of other instruments to fill in those gaps. So in this particular example, when I'm orchestrating a bass, the first question I ask myself is, which octave is the double bass going to be in, or whatever the lowest voice is? Is it going to be this B flat or the B flat an octave higher? If you don't think about this, you're going to have to re-orchestrate later. In orchestration, sometimes, like if you get the doubling wrong or it's too over-orchestrated, you can fix these things in a couple days, but if you choose the wrong ambitus, the wrong bottom octave, you may have to spend several months re-orchestrating entire passage, which you don't want to do. Okay, so we're going to orchestrate the bass first. Here I have the double bass in octaves of the cello. It's a very classic solution. You don't have to do it with the cellos. You can double the double bass in bassoons, tuba, maybe even trombone, and you can double at the octave or the unison. Be very, very wary of not doubling the double bass at all. Obviously, you can consult Debussy's Pelléas and Melisande for a plethora of examples. There are even examples in some of Beethoven where very rarely he is not doubling the double bass, but it is quite the exception. I find that the sound is very creux, as we say in French. It's kind of like just raw and undefined, and it's dissatisfactory. Natural resonance. So we learn about the harmonic series in school, and I think there is a very important reason, is the ear perceives, the upper regions much more acutely. So we tend to put the tighter intervals, the thirds in the upper registers, seconds, versus the bottom registers we like to have nice and open. This is what is natural in human hearing. Be wary of composition schools where everyone's competing to be different and special. Your voice, as it already is unique and special, and it's what we want to hear. You don't need to force yourself to be different by doing things that are unnecessarily unnatural. Okay, so I chose my ambitus, so I have a B flat in the low B flat and the double bass, and the violin. So notice the ambitus is like 3 octaves. So we should be able to fill it in. It doesn't present major difficulties, but we won't be able to fill it in one note for each part. We're going to have to do divisi strings. Of course, the danger with divisi strings is that you thin out the sound, but in this passage, it is very much a chord, so the resonance of the chord is going to just bring volume to it anyway. When you do divisi strings, especially for simple chords, you have to ask yourself, which note am I going to double? Is it going to be the root, the third, or the fifth? They're all very different, and of course, the training that you get for hearing that would be addressed through harmony. Here I have a lot of B flat, the root doubled, so it's clear I want a very sturdy, almost aggressively sturdy opening for the fifth movement of my symphony. I want to bring your attention to something that I addressed slightly in the intro, but I want to expand upon now, is you have to be wary of fuzziness in your hearing when you're orchestrating. It's very common for your first piece, when you're first starting, you're like, what am I really hearing? I have the piano score in front of me. Maybe you know the main melody, the instrumentation, but is it doubled? Is it doubled at the octave? All these things may feel super, super fuzzy for you. Again, the first solution to this is to sharpen your ear with real music. So going to live concerts. When I was orchestrating my symphony helpers or reorchestrating my symphony helpers on the way, I was living in Paris and I was going to see a lot of opera because I just was generally interested in opera. But what I noticed is the next day when I went to orchestrate helpers on the way, I could hear exactly what I wanted, but I struggled for so long and have to sit for 20, 30 minutes, an hour, just like, what am I hearing? It was so much clearer. So for you, it could be whatever music you want to listen to, but go listen to live music. And of course, you may need supplemental classes in harmony. It's not going to get you out of a jam right now, or not even the next couple of months, but long term, if you want to really be independent and to be the master of your own destiny, you need to find that liberation first for the training of harmony. Okay, let's talk about thirds, okay? So when you first start orchestrating, it's possible you're going to struggle, like, how much third do I need? I know when I first started orchestrating, I felt insecure. I felt like, I'm worried if I don't have enough third, the audience won't perceive that it's minor versus major. But I would suggest thinking of simple triads, root, third, fifth. The perfect fifth is pretty sturdy. It's like a white blank canvas. And any kind of third, major or minor, even if it's really small, it's going to immediately color that canvas, adding a little bit of blue. So you really don't need that much third, but again, long-term investment would be to hear the harmony, and that's going to address it as well. Charles Coquelin talks about this in his orchestration manual, which I think is the best orchestration manual out there, far better than the Adler. I was looking for, I think it's in the third or fourth volume where he talks about why you don't need that much third, and he gives some really good examples, and he talks about it in reference to the viola. I could not find it in time for this video series, but once I'm able to review it, it is in French, but once I'm able to review it, I will translate it and put a separate video where we can look at this really good example. Let's talk about tessitura. So tessitura is the range that an instrument is in. In this example from my symphony, you can see with the strings, everyone is in a comparable tessitura, right? We have the double bass is in a low register, cello's in a low register, violin 1 in a rather low register because it usually plays much higher, violin 2, lowest string, okay? Viola, dark-ish, low-ish register. So just from the placement of each instrument, I can see that most likely this chord is going to be well balanced. A bonus tip I would like to offer you right now, it may not be immediately applicable. I don't want to throw too many things going through your head, but it is something that you will just naturally get into sooner than later. And that's the difference between the sounding orchestration and the written orchestration. So if you look at this example from my symphony, you can see that we have the upper strings sol ponticello. Everyone is tremolo, but the lower strings are not sol ponticello. The reason for this is I was listening to the music and really listening acutely. And I was like, you know what? When I hear the sol ponticello on a tremolo in that low register, double bass and cello, I don't like the sound. I want a clearer bass. So in order to give the impression that all the strings are sol ponticello, I actually had to remove it from the lower string voices so it didn't create an undesirable effect. You'll probably discover this firsthand when you mark like fortissimo for an instrument that can't possibly play fortissimo in a certain range in order to get a desired forte. I like to discuss the orchestration of the brass, but before I do so, I'd like to first announce that I'm currently creating an orchestration course or class that will be made available both on YouTube as well as on my website, in which I will combine what is great in the French tradition of orchestration versus what is great in the American tradition of orchestration. So in America, you are allowed to compose in your own style, you orchestrate in your own style, but I find the classes, and I've taken many different classes, they don't really teach you proper balance, resonance. They don't teach you about the thinking process that actually goes into effective orchestration. And in the French tradition, you're orchestrating piano scores. So you get a score in, Debussy's music, Mozart, Beethoven, and then you have to orchestrate it. And it actually really, really prepares you because it puts you in the mindset you have to actually orchestrate, and it thrusts you with real world problems that you're going to have to deal with. However, I find the French tradition, you never get to orchestrate in your own style. And there's certain things that will only come up when you're orchestrating in your own style. So I like certain things from both the French and the American tradition. I want to combine it into one class. So I'm currently devising a curriculum that I hope will be available by fall or winter the very latest. So if you have questions or concerns or frustrations with orchestration, now is the time to let me know. You can do so in the comments below, or you could contact me through my website. Ambitus of the brass, okay? So we have tuba on the lowest note and we have trumpet on the highest note. Notice that the ambitus mirrors exactly the ambitus of strings. This does not mean anything necessarily. It's not a recommendation, but it's something you do have to notice. So remember, you want to be thinking of the ambitus of the entire orchestra, okay? But you also have to think of each section. A quick mention about transposition. Here we can see that the trumpets are on a fourth. So automatically, given that we're in B flat minor, the only possible notes they could be on are F and B flat. Boom. When you're orchestrating, you're sometimes going to have to use quick logic and quick thinking so that you're not spending unnecessary time with the basics like transposition. Let's talk about the chord spacing of the brass. So tuba is on the lowest note of the chord. We have the trombones in a minor triad and a rather a low-ish register. So the sound is going to be kind of thick and muddy. Remember when we talked about the harmonic series? So generally in your orchestration, you want octaves in the lowest region, at least if it's like something very tonal and simple chords. But in this particular case, I was hearing something that would be kind of like stuck in the mud. So this particular orchestration is more appropriate. Notice that trumpets are on top, French horns are in the middle. And again, we see comparable tessituras. So everyone's in a low or low-ish register. Now I'd like to share with you a fundamental rule or suggestion in orchestration. I have found it in the French tradition, of course, the Charles Coquelin. I believe Rimsky-Korsakov talks about it, and I think even Adler talks about it, okay? And I am a brass player. Tuba was my first instrument, and I can attest personally that this is sound advice. So what they say is when it's forte volume or higher, you're generally going to need 2 French horns to match the volume of 1 trumpet. Likewise, they recommend that you have 2 French horns to match the volume of 1 trombone. Obviously, there are circumstances where this may not apply, but it is a really good place to start. So if you look at how I orchestrate this passage, you'll see that I have 4 French horns, but they're only covering 2 notes versus 2 trumpets, which are on 2 separate notes. Next, I'd like to talk about the harmony. So you'll notice that the brass are doing parallel moving chords, which has its own kind of special orchestration. But notice that the tuba stays on the root, okay? And the reason for that is that the tuba is a pedal here, okay? And it gives a harmonic reference. So even though the brass are moving, the harmony is not actually changing. This, of course, you would learn through harmony. If I had had the tuba moving in parallel motion with the brass, it would have resulted in what we call a confusion of the harmony. So again, I hope you can see if there are holes or any kind of fuzziness in your hearing in terms of harmony, it will haunt you royally when you orchestrate your first work. Thank you for watching. I hope that you found this useful. Again, I am currently creating an orchestration class that will be available on YouTube as well as on my website that will share the beauty of the French tradition plus the American tradition. So if you have questions, you can let me know in the comments, and I wish you the best of luck with your orchestrations. 7th and 9th chords in the woodwinds. So we can see that the upper woodwinds, oboes and flutes, are on C and F, okay? So we don't have that B flat. Notice that the F, which would be the 5th of the chord,